Fellow Australians, it is my melancholy duty to inform you officially that in consequence of a persistence by Germany in her invasion of Poland, Great Britain has declared war upon her, and that as a result, Australia is also at war. No harder task can fall to the lot of a democratic leader than to make such an announcement.
Men and women of Australia, we are at war with Japan. That has happened because in the first instance, Japanese naval and air forces launched an unprovoked attack on British and United States territory. Because our vital interests are imperiled, and because the rights of free people in the whole Pacific are assailed. As a result, the Australian government this afternoon took the necessary steps which will mean that a state of war exists between Australia and Japan.
Well, you have to remember that Phillip Island was a rural community. It was a community of about 1,100 people. It was a number of small hamlets and mainly fishing and farming. So it was very much a rural, small community, fairly isolated, although of course there were connections to Melbourne and across to Western Port. Well, they did the same types of things that everyone in Australia did. Many of the men went away to war, about 30% of Australia's population between the ages of 18 and 30 went away to war. The women took over the jobs that had been left behind. Some men couldn't go because of the manpower situation. Older men found they had more responsibility, and so did younger men. And the whole area, I suppose, joined together in order to strengthen the war effort. I suppose what it did was bring little communities like Phillip Island into connection with a wider world, perhaps a world that they hadn't had much experience with before. Apart from the world of war, it meant that people worked well together. It meant that people carried out different tasks they hadn't done before.
I was sitting with my mother and father in the old family kitchen at Carisbrook, listening to the radio. No television in those days. When an announcer came on to say there's going to be a special announcement, and Bob Menzies came on, who was the Prime Minister at that time, to announce that Great Britain had declared war on Germany, and so that meant that we were at war with Germany from that moment.
Millie lived on the next farm, and we were together when the war was declared. And I remember sitting on their front veranda just talking endlessly about this war, how terrible, and that we couldn't believe that it would last any length of time. When people said 2 months, we thought, I remember thinking, couldn't possibly live through that.
It was very hard. We were dairying at the time. The whole property amounted to close on 2,000 acres. It was a lot of work riding about on horseback. My sister, Pat Bryant, was a great help. She was still living at my house. We endeavoured to get a couple of young lads from Melbourne. My mother went to Melbourne a couple of occasions and got these young lads. They wouldn't stay long, they didn't like country life. The one lad in particular did stay. He was only 16, but he got the urge. All young lads were keen to go to war. And one day he told us he'd like to go. So he went to Melbourne, put his age up to 18 and got into the army. And a few months later we read where he was killed in Egypt.
Only a boy.
Yeah.
Then as the war went on and I left school, about 15, well, we were farming and labour was short, so I got back into the business of farming, and we were milking cows, we were dairying, we grew chicory, which was in great demand by the American Army that was out here at that stage, and chicory, of course, is used to make coffee. And it's coffee and chicory. You can get straight coffee, of course, out of coffee beans, but chicory was, as I said, in great demand for coffee, for the Yanks, as we call them. We also grew vegetables, carrots mainly, and a few potatoes or beetroot, and those vegetables were dehydrated and then sent to feed the service personnel.
Because things were pretty tough, we worked pretty hard, there was no manpower. The girls used to help on the farms, in the family, and it was a pretty serious time, of course. Everybody wondered where it was going to end and what was going to happen.
Our war effort, of course, was a contract that we had with the government for growing carrots. That was rather marvellous because it brought us in a fairly good income, of course. My brother was living with us at the time, so I think Bob had about 8 acres of carrots in, a tremendous amount. But however, it saved the day, and financially it was pretty good.
When I left school, my brother joined, when the war broke out, my brother joined the army, and my sister was one of my sisters was working away, and my other sister and myself helped my father, who had a contract to growing carrots for the forces. So we were type of land army girls, I guess, and we used to help him harvest the crop. So it had to be planted and hoed, cultivated, and then it had to be cropped, and that took a great deal of our time.
Did life on Phillip Island change much during the war?
Oh yes, I think people didn't move around as much. There was petrol rationing, so there'd only be one boat a day, and the cars didn't move around very much unless they had these charcoal burners on them, but which were always a danger in the summertime with bushfires and things like that. But at least it created the gas and it made the car go. And there was clothing rationing and meat rationing. So I've written a few more things down that were rationed. Clothing particularly was one of the biggest things with the children. Sugar and butter were rationed. So you really had to think out what you were going to do.
Yes.
And sort of make do with vegetables. You grew your own vegetables, and you know, if you were wanting to go somewhere in particular, you had to save your petrol tickets up. Yeah. But there was one good thing about having a baby. If you had a baby, you were given extra petrol tickets, so that was quite an incentive.
And I remember, first of all, the rationing, of course, clothes rationing, food rationing, petrol rationing, coupons for this, that and the other, which we all had. But we all seemed to be, on the farm, we had sufficient coupons to keep us going. And then, of course, I had wonderful neighbours, and Mr. Jimmy Roberts and his wife Gertie, and, of course, the Luke family. So we had a barter system which worked very, very well, extremely well. But however, I remember I was having babies at the time, of course, naturally. 3 children born in the war years, really. But however, we managed to get enough coupons. We managed to have enough food because on the farm, of course, you have lots of your own eggs and milk and butter and all the rest of it.
We learned to make lots of sacrifices. We didn't have all the luxuries. We had to economise. We had our food rationing and coupons. We were all growing up just wanting to go to dances, and our evening frocks we had to wash in shellite. It's a wonder we didn't get blown up because there was no dry cleaning. no modern cons. We ordered our frocks through mail order service in Melbourne.
Because it was rationing during the war. Butter was rationed, sugar, all those things were rationed, sugar. Clothing, had to have tickets, petrol you couldn't get. Well, I think they got a certain amount. It was only a matter of 2 or 3 gallons a month. We never went far on that, of course.
Yes, our farm was self-sufficient, Terry.
I believe you made butter and you did have a huge orchard.
That's right.
And you'd kill your sheep.
Yes, we killed sheep and lived off the land. Rabbits were plentiful and mutton birds. Although the season was closed, we still took the risk and had a feed of birds every year.
Just to
Picked up the eggs, as many islanders did.
supplement the diet.
Yeah.
We didn't have, we're in the army, we never had a great deal of spare time. We used to, I think I took part in 1 football match and 1 cricket match. But here, of course, before the war, the sport was pretty strong. We used to have cricket in the summer, football in the winter. And of course, when the war started, that all stopped. There's no manpower to carry on with it. And it never started, the football started up in 44 again, when Wonthaggi started a comp, and we were in that, and we've been in that ever since. And the cricket started up about the same time. We used to, of course, a lot of entertainment during the war and raising money for various troops with dances and that sort of thing. I think that we used to have a dance in the Shire Hall here one Friday night, and the next Friday night they had one at Ventnor Hall. And that was the only entertainment we had. It was a different lifestyle. It was more, everywhere we went, we either had to push a bike or ride a horse or something like that. I remember one incident this was rather funny, although we mightn't have thought it was funny at the time. We had an old Dodge car, and one night we were going to a dance and we had it parked out the front while we had tea, and all of a sudden there was a tremendous bang. One of the tyres had blown out. So that was the end of that, because you couldn't buy tyres anymore, so the car was pushed into the shed and there it stayed.
Well, I was going to school at Ventnor on Phillip Island during the war, and I can remember quite clearly when war was announced, thinking that there was something exciting about war, that there wasn't about depression. We were coming out of a depression. And then our school got ready then for our war efforts. We built a trench, an air raid shelter along the front of the school, and we used to, the teacher would blow the whistle and we'd all rush to this air raid shelter to practice falling in. It's a great wonder the air raid shelter didn't all fall in on top of us. And as a war effort with the school, we collected bottles, and we decided we'd have this day at the tip collecting bottles, and we sold those and the money went to the war effort.
Oh, well, what I remember best probably weren't the best things about the war. It was the shock when it was first in 39 as a small schoolboy that war was declared, and we wondered what was in for us. But that wasn't, it was a bigger shock still when the Japanese came into the war, and we were really then very conscious of what possibly could happen, even though we were fortunate enough to be many miles away from battle zones or anything like that. But we then found that as a school child we set up a Red Cross, and we were Junior Red Cross, which we did a fair bit of work in sending parcels and what have you to our former pupils that were either POWs or away in the army. And that gave us a great lot of satisfaction to know. We'd get a note back from some of them to say that they'd received them. Very sad. We had to we planted a memorial tree in the school ground to one of our former pupils or students that was killed in Malaya, and that was a very sad time.
They started organising blackouts. They thought that we'd have aircraft flying over and bombing us, so all the houses had to have a blackout. And my father and a man just up here, who isn't here now, in Church Street, Ron Scott, were the air wardens for the eastern part of Cowes, or Thompson Avenue. And each night they'd go around to check to see that all the houses were properly blacked out. And I remember particularly my father coming back one night and just about hitting the roof, because we were the only place showing a light out of the big skylight in the kitchen at Carisbrook, and we showed everything. But anyway, that didn't happen again.
Well, the thing that I remember most is the blackouts, because every window had to be blacked out and the car headlights had to be blacked out so there was just a slit, and the council painted the trunks of the cypress trees white so that anyone driving into the town would know where they were on the road.
We coped very well with the blackout. I was able to buy unbleached calico, and I got Congress crystals, and I dyed the unbleached calico and put it all up to the windows, of course, and we managed very well with that blackout. But of course the cars all had to be hooded so that there were no lights to be seen at all. We had really set up on the island here the VDC, and of course the watches out of the coast watches. We had the spotters, and as Peter would remember, we were really at war, weren't we, Peter?
Yeah, it was
defending, absolutely defending our little island, and I'm quite sure that if the Japanese had really arrived, at which we've heard that the submarines were in Bass Strait, but had they landed, they'd got a very noisy and very good reception.
And I had just finished my nursing training, general nursing and midwifery at the Women's Hospital and infant welfare. And I had done a little bit of infant welfare work. And I came back to Cowes to help my mother and father and aunt, who had guest houses here at Carisbrook here, and Broadwater, which was over the road. That's a housing estate now, to help them run their businesses. And I did the first aid demonstrations on the island. That went on for quite a long time. I think everybody came, and then the home nursing after that. And then I had to move over to San Remo and Druin and Warrigal and do them. Well, it took up quite a lot of time.
Did you train nurses to go?
I trained people to look after people if there'd been a disaster here, and then, if need be, look after the sick in their own homes.
Right.
I was asked to teach the islanders first aid. So we had lots of meetings in the old Shire Hall, which was in Thompson Avenue. It's not there now, it's been demolished, opposite the chemist, the pharmacy. And we had the use of the lower town hall. And we had the first aid lectures there. People came from all over the island, some from San Remo. And then after that, there were home nursing lectures. That took quite a long time. My mother was the head of the Red Cross on the island, and she didn't feel that she was able to sit up at the council chamber and advise them about the welfare of the citizens. So I was sent up to take her place. And I used to sit up there next to Mr. Bob Davies' grandfather,
All right.
Dawson Davy. And he looked after me there. And when something came up about the war and the care of the island, I was asked to ask what I thought about it and gave my advice. There were a lot of them. There could have been about 100 women and children who were brought down here when they first arrived from Java and the other islands up there after the Japanese invasion. And just after they arrived, there was a big fire out on the Osborne Roberts sanctuary where there were a great number of koalas, and a lot of them were burned, but not killed. Yeah. And they were brought in, and my aunt had hammocks put up to put the badly burnt ones in. And these Dutch ladies bucked in and helped look after these koalas. And they saved most of them by their constant nursing. And the doctor we had at that time, Dr. Williams, he was able to produce some very, very new antiseptic ointment, which I suppose is a very, common one these days, which was wonderful in the healing of these burns that these koalas had. And then they were put back. Anyway, these ladies, they had a school here in the house for the children they had, and they stayed for some months. Another thing my mother did as Red Cross Commandant at that time for the island was organise the making of camouflage nets. You've heard of camouflage nets. They used to put these great nets over the tanks and where they had tents for the soldiers to stay. And she had a place set up out here on an old, it isn't there, a veranda now, where there was the makings of 2 camouflage nets. And anybody visiting the house would be given a shuttle and taken out to the veranda to do a few bits of the camouflage net. Yeah. And they made dozens of them, with people coming down particularly to make nets and have afternoon tea and a chat while they made these nets. And also there was a centre here for making bandages to send overseas. And strangely, we demolished a building a few years back, and here was a box of these bandages, still in beautiful order, that had not been sent away overseas. They were, heavy calico bandages, and finished off with a safety pin all ready to do it up.
Well, a typical day really would be helping my father on the farm and also cooking and making fruit cakes for the soldiers. And of course we used to knit of an evening, making socks for the forces. And as I said to you earlier, mine were a disaster because when I couldn't turn the heel of the sock properly, so my mother said, no way, the soldiers will get blisters on their feet, so my socks were never sent away.
The barber was called up, so it became my part there to get some clippers and decent scissors and do a little bit of hair cutting for the neighbours. Short back and sides, as I've said before, but it earned me 2 shillings as we knew it nowadays, 20 cents in our modern language.
Brother, John Thornborough, enlisted in the army, and I can remember he came home to say goodbye. I was still here, and he came home to say goodbye, and my mother was devastated about John going off. And I can remember standing down on Erewhon Point rocks, seeing this ferry go off with John waving, and my poor mum breaking her heart.
The Navy used to have gunnery practice, ACAC gun practice from over at Cerberus, and they used to shoot at a target towed by a small plane, which I think that used to come off the Air Force camp there at Summers. And an ACAC shell is usually set to go off at a certain height. Well, some of these shells must have been duds because they weren't going off and they were landing out around our property at around Ventnor. And I know, you'd be wandering around the place and all of a sudden there'd be bang and one of these things would explode. And anyhow, it got that hectic towards the end that we had to contact the Navy, Department of Navy and Department of Defence, and anyhow they shifted their direction shifted their firing range, so they weren't directed at Phillip Island. And I know one of our neighbours, he was repairing a gate into his cow yard, I think it was, and he was called to the telephone while he was away. One of these shells landed in the gateway, and had he been there, he'd have been, lucky to still be alive. Another night I was out, I think probably looking at some rabbit traps, and there was a heck of a bang out towards Bass Strait, and flash in the sky, and I was quite convinced, the Japs were landing at that time, but they weren't.
We were bombed. The naval base were practicing, and the shells landed on the island around the school. And there was much excitement, but we were being attacked by our own Navy. And so there was, I think in the end my father got in touch with the minister, and that was really quite frightening because they were live shells that were landing, so the Navy came over and disposed of them, etc.
The next procedure was one day my brother and I were riding to Cape Willamai on horseback along the ocean beach. And we came across this big nameplate with the City of Raymore written on it. And I more or less decided I'd bring the draft horses over and drag it home. It was a huge thing, a name carved into it, 2 inches deep. But by the time I got over there, a few days later, it apparently washed off again, and I never succeeded in getting it. But, it always worried me, and some 50 years later, in 1990, the story was written in The Age, which I happened to see, about the wreck of the City of Rayville. So I read it right through, a most interesting story. Is that the City of Rayville hit the mine off Cape Otway. And the fishermen at Cape Otway set out in 3 small barracuda boats, they were called, about 22 feet long. And they rescued the crew who were in lifeboats. And one man lost his life. At the last minute he went back on the ship to get something, and he went down with the ship. Prior to that, the German raider Penguin captured a Norwegian tanker named the Storstad, which they renamed Passat, and loaded it with mines, which they set in Bass Strait from the east coast of Tasmania to Cape Otway. The first casualty was a ship called the SS Cambridge off Wilson's Promontory on the 7th of November 1940, when one sailor lost his life. 24 hours later, the City of Rayville hit the mine off Cape Otway.
At that time, they were planning to blow up the bridge. The bridge was quite new, the first bridge, not this bridge. And the evacuation of the islanders from the island by fishing boats, And this was all because they were quite certain that Western Port Bay was going to be invaded by the Japanese because of Crib Point naval base being over here at Hastings or near Hastings. It was a very important training centre at that time, and we had a lot of ships in and out going to the centre. That's why they thought the island would be, invaded. Yeah. And also, over on the Mornington Peninsula, just over here at Balnarring and Merricks, there was a big army centre and headquarters, and that had to be protected too. But as soon as General MacArthur came down from the Philippines, that was all changed. It was quite decided then that the Japanese wouldn't get down this far.
Phillip Island being at the entrance of Western Port Bay, with the naval base at the back of, on the Mornington Peninsula at Hastings or Crib Point, and there was always a theory that if there was ever a Japanese attack on the naval base, well, the first thing they do is blow up the bridge. I don't know what really, when you look back, what good purpose Phillip Island would have served the Japanese if they had have arrived here. But anyway, we were all right behind the war effort. We had the local VDC, which as a youngster I tried to get involved, but I was too young, and they used to do regular patrol work. And we had a group of army personnel stationed out not far from home for quite some time. They were signallers with the AIF.
When I was living at WWII house and farming on my parents' property, and one night on the 11th of December 1940, my father got a telegram from the Ports and Harbours Department saying to put the light out on Cape WWII immediately. I was in bed asleep at the time. It was 10 or 11 o'clock at night. I thought of going to Cape WWII on such a terrible night. It was blowing a howling southwest gale and pouring rain. I wanted to put it off till the morning, but my father wouldn't have a bar of that. It's got to be done tonight. First problem was to catch a horse. The horses were fed on chaff, which we usually carried out in a tin and put into boxes. So I just walked into a small paddock where the horses were and rattled the tin, and they all came up. And I caught one and saddled him up and set off for Cape WWII. Well, the first part of the journey wasn't too bad on the beach, about 4 kilometres along the beach. It's the white sand, I could see where I was going. But once I left the beach up on the Cape WWII itself, which is black sand and tussocks and marram grass, I couldn't see a thing. All I could see through the blinding rain was a light that flashed every 12 seconds. So I headed for that, and it was pretty gruesome because Cape WWII is undermined with muttonbird burrows, as you know. And not a very nice place to ride a horse. Anyway, I eventually got there, and there was nowhere to tie the horse up, and the light is very close to the edge of the cliff, 400-foot drop. So I had to hold the horse with one hand and work tools with another to turn the light out. And the rain didn't ease up and the wind didn't ease up, but we got the job done and eventually turned for home. And it was an uneasy feeling because I didn't know what was going on. Everything was kept secret. I was half expecting to meet the enemy on the beach anywhere on the way home.